In 1861, Abraham Lincoln's bodyguard traveled through Baltimore with a pair of heavy revolvers, a huge fighting knife, and two weapons so obscure most Americans today have never heard their names. One is now banned in 38 states. The other never made it into a single history textbook. 25 weapons Pinkerton detectives carried, and the reason they all quietly vanished. Stick around to number 8. That's the one hidden under a federal agent's vest the night someone tried to assassinate a president-elect. Let's set the scene. It's 1850. Scottish immigrant Alan Pinkerton and a Chicago lawyer named Edward Rucker open something called the Northwestern Police Agency. There is no FBI. There is no Secret Service. Not yet. If a railroad company wanted someone tracked, a labor union needed to be broken, or a president-elect needed to survive a train ride through hostile territory, you called Pinkerton. By 1890, that agency had become something that made Congress nervous. An army without a uniform. A force with its own weapons, its own codes, no democratic oversight. Ohio outlawed it entirely. 14 states petitioned Congress for limits. What Pinkerton agents actually carried and exactly how those weapons were made to disappear is what we're covering today. Number 8 is the one that's going to surprise you. These 25 items run from physical weapons agents carried on their bodies to operational weapons, codes, covers, systems, tactics. Some are now illegal. Some are just forgotten. A few were so effective the federal government had to pass new laws specifically to stop them. Let's begin. Number 1. The Colt 1851 Navy Revolver. 6 shots, .36 caliber, percussion cap. The Civil War sidearm. Most people stop there. But here's what almost nobody knows. Pinkerton agents didn't carry one. They carried 2. Ward Hill Lamon, who traveled with Pinkerton's team to protect Lincoln in 1861, was documented carrying a pair of heavy revolvers as standard kit. Staggered draw. 2 shots before the other man could clear leather. By 1900, the percussion cap revolver was obsolete. By the Gun Control Act of 1968, the specific loading method was reclassified entirely. Most people assume the next weapon was a frontier tool. It wasn't. It was specifically designed for city work. Number 2, the Bowie fighting knife. You know it from the Alamo. Big blade, clip point. Rough, outdoor, frontier, that's the image. What history class never told you is that Pinkerton agents wore theirs sewn into the vest-lining blade horizontal, grip toward the right hand. Accessible in under a second in a crowd invisible to anyone watching. The frontier version was a hunting tool. The Pinkerton version was an urban concealed weapon with a specific draw. State concealed carry laws, spreading through the East from the 1870s onward, classified exactly this carry method as a criminal offense. The sewn vest sheath disappeared with the law. If the knife sounds like overkill, number 3 was insurance for when even 2 revolvers weren't enough. Number 3, the Derringer. Everyone knows this one. Lincoln's assassination. Booth, palm-sized, 1 shot. The version you've heard is the cover story. The Pinkerton version wasn't tucked in a vest pocket. It was carried in a sleeve holster sewn into the coat lining, right forearm, grip toward the palm. The draw was a wrist drop motion. Nobody watching the agent's hand would see him reach. The sleeve holster method never transferred when double-action revolvers replaced the Derringer in the late 1880s. The specific draw technique disappeared with the men who taught it. Nobody knows exactly when Pinkerton agents started carrying the next one. It predates the agency by a decade. Number 4, the pepperbox pistol. Multiple barrels rotating around a central axis. 5 or 6 shots in something smaller than your fist. And here's the part that gets buried. Before Colt patents expired and revolvers got cheap, pepper boxes were the only affordable multi-shot concealable firearm a working detective could buy. Alan Pinkerton's first team of 6 rail operatives, contracted in 1855, were armed with pepper boxes and Bowie knives. Nothing else. Once Colt's manufacturing scaled, the pepperbox vanished from field use within 3 years. No record survives of a single Pinkerton training manual from the pepperbox era. Number 5 looks like a movie prop, but it's been specifically banned in over 20 states and was still being confiscated from Pinkerton agents as late as 1920. Number 5. Brass knuckles. The iconic iron casting. Street weapon, back alley brawl, that's the image. But here's what almost nobody knows. Pinkerton agents carried 2 kinds, the smooth iron set for interrogation work and a second set with raised spurs for close-quarters combat. Ward Hill Layman, Lincoln's bodyguard, was documented carrying standard brass knuckles as part of his concealed kit in 1861. 25 states now specifically ban possession. California added them to the prohibited weapons list in 1931. New York followed in 1974. Most of those laws cite the Homestead Strike of 1892 as the founding incident. Number 6 looks like something a Victorian gentleman carries to the opera, which is exactly the point. Number 6. The sword cane, a walking stick with a concealed 20-inch blade inside. People think this was a wealthy eccentric's toy. There's a reason it stopped being issued by the 1890s. The sword cane was a cover weapon, carried by operatives in urban undercover assignments where a visible revolver would have broken their cover. James McParland, who infiltrated the Molly Maguires in the 1870s posing as an Irish laborer, was documented carrying one during the early phase of that operation. Pennsylvania, where McParland operated, banned concealed bladed instruments over 4 inches in 1939. Number 7 is shorter than a ruler and heavier than it looks. It's the reason half the Homestead Strike prisoners said they didn't remember being arrested. Number 7. Also called the blackjack. Leather exterior over a lead shot core. 6 inches long. Applied to the back of a skull, it produced unconsciousness in under a second, without visible bruising until morning. What history class never told you? Pinkerton agents carried 2 variants. The filled sap, rigid for combat. The slapper, flat, flexible, half the weight for controlled interrogation. Field agents chose based on assignment. The sap was outlawed in most states by 1975. California's Penal Code Section 22210 classifies it as a prohibited dangerous weapon. It is no longer manufactured legally in the United States. And now we get to number 8. The one Abraham Lincoln's own bodyguard carried the night. Someone tried to put a knife in the president-elect's ribs. Number 8. The slingshot. Most Americans have never heard this word. It is not a slingshot. Entirely different. A lead weight attached to a leather strap or wrist cord, worn on the wrist, looped over the hand. To use it, you snapped your wrist. The weight accelerated to roughly the speed of a swung baseball bat, concentrated into the area of a silver dollar. This is verified by a Smithsonian primary source. Ward Hill Layman. Lincoln's self-appointed bodyguard, traveling with Pinkerton's team in the February 1861 Baltimore operation, was documented carrying this weapon alongside his revolvers, his brass knuckles, and his hunting knife, all hidden under his vest. Smithsonian Magazine described the slingshot as a crude street weapon involving a weight tied to a wrist strap, popular at that time among street gangs. That was 1861. By 2026, it is banned in 38 states as an illegal impact weapon, same category as nunchucks. A weapon that traveled hidden under a federal lawyer's vest while protecting a president-elect has been quietly illegal in most of this country for half a century. We've covered the weapons agents put on their bodies. The next set is different. These are the weapons Pinkerton built into the operations themselves. Number 9. The LeMat revolver. 9 rounds of pistol ammunition, plus a single-shot smoothbore shotgun barrel built directly below the cylinder. A thumb movement toggled between pistol and shotgun. Designed by a French-American physician named Jean-Alexandre LeMat in 1856. There's a reason this stopped showing up in Pinkerton field records by 1870. The LeMat was favored by agents in frontier territory during the Civil War. 9 pistol shots and close-range shotgun capability in one weapon. When Colt's single-action army became available at scale in 1873, the LeMat disappeared. No LeMat has been commercially manufactured in the United States since 1865. Number 10 is the only weapon on this list nobody carries in a holster. Nobody agrees on exactly when Pinkerton agents started using it. Number 10. The hidden boot sheath. Not the knife, the sheath. A secondary blade carried in a leather sheath, stitched to the interior of the right boot, blade down. Invisible to anyone patting down outer clothing. The last resort when everything else had been confiscated. What history class never told you is that Pinkerton's field manual specifically required frontier operatives to carry a secondary blade, in addition to their primary weapon. Illustrations from the 1877 Harper's Weekly coverage of Pinkerton operations show the characteristic boot height that indicates the extra leather layer inside. Concealed carry statutes spreading through the western states between 1880 and 1920, specifically addressed bladed weapons worn concealed upon the person. The boot sheath is now a weapons violation in 31 states. Number 11 isn't a weapon in any conventional sense. But in 1861, a Pinkerton operative without it was considered unarmed. Number 11. The railroad pocket watch. Every grandfather had one. A pocket watch isn't a weapon, that's what you'd say. You're going to want to hear this part. Pinkerton rail operatives starting in 1855 were contractually required to carry a railroad-grade pocket watch accurate to 30 seconds per day. It wasn't a fashion item. It was an operational instrument. A rail operative's surveillance strategy depended on precise timing. When the train departed, when a conductor was expected at a specific car, when the route would place a suspect alone. When Pinkerton shifted from rail security to general detective work after 1900, the watch requirement quietly dropped. The operational technique it enabled has never been documented publicly. The next one was how Pinkerton agents talk to each other without talking. The reason most of those communications no longer exist has nothing to do with secrecy. Number 12. The cipher report system. Pinkerton agents were assigned numbers instead of names. Every report used operative numbers throughout. No names. If intercepted, no one could be identified. And here's the part that gets buried. Most of the cipher keys, report ledgers, and operational archives from 1850 through 1871 were destroyed in the Great Chicago Fire of October 8, 1871. Pinkerton's headquarters burned. The key undercover operative in the 1861 Lincoln operation, Harry Davies, had his entire case file destroyed that night. His methods, his cipher, his informant network, gone, Alan Pinkerton died in 1884, still trying to reconstruct what burned. Number 13 is the smallest item on this list. You could hold it in your palm, and it helped save a president's life. Number 13. The cockade brooch, a small fabric rosette in the colors of a political cause. In 1861 Baltimore, a cockade in the secession colors told every person in the room whose side you were on. But here's what almost nobody knows. Kate Warren, America's first female private detective, hired by Pinkerton in 1856 at age 23, wore one deliberately pinned to her chest when she checked into Barnum's hotel to infiltrate the assassination plot against Lincoln. Her weapon was the assumption that a woman wearing that pin must be one of them. She got inside the conspirators' social circle in 48 hours. Warren died in 1868 at 34. Her infiltration tradecraft, wearing the target's own symbols, was never formally codified after her death. The next one came from a completely different world, and nobody fully knows how Warren developed it. Number 14. The Fortune Teller's Kit. Kate Warren deployed as a fortune teller, full costume, full performance, to extract intelligence from a target who would never have spoken to a detective. There's a reason this stopped being taught by the 1870s. Warren's methods weren't written into a training manual. They lived in her head, and in the heads of the women she trained in Pinkerton's Female Detective Bureau, which she established and ran starting in 1860. When she died in January 1868, the Bureau died with her. Her specific methods became unavailable to the next generation of investigators. Number 15 looks like paperwork. It is the most dangerous weapon on this list for anyone trying to use it today. Alan Pinkerton himself, undercover in Baltimore in February 1861, was known as John H. Hutchinson, a Southern stockbroker. He rented office space at 44 South Street. Business cards printed, social events attended in character. What history class never told you is how complete these covers were. False address, false references, false professional history, false contact in another city who would confirm the story. Today, the identity fraud statute, 18 U.S.C. Section 1028, enacted in 1982, makes most of these specific methods federal crimes. Pinkerton's standard operating procedure from 1861 is a federal felony in 2026. Number 16 is the weapon that made all the others deniable. No name in any report. Every operative referred to by number only. Any operative whose cover was blown faced immediate dismissal. And here's the part that gets buried. In 2000, the company donated its confidential bandit files to the Library of Congress. Files on Jesse James, Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid. An archivist noted some papers had disintegrated nearly to powder from neglect. The entire operative registry from the 1850s through 1900 was never recovered. Most of those men are permanently anonymous. We've reached the point where Pinkerton stopped just carrying weapons and started deploying them at scale. Number 17 is the one that started a congressional debate. Number 17. The incendiary device. This is the item that changed what Pinkerton was allowed to do. January 26, 1875. 2 in the morning, Clay County, Missouri. Pinkerton agents surrounded the farmhouse of Zerelda Samuel, Jesse James's mother, and threw a metal sphere through the window. It exploded on the kitchen floor. Zerelda Samuel lost her right arm. Jesse's 8-year-old half-brother, Archie, was killed. Jesse James was not in the house. Within weeks, a bill was introduced in Congress to limit private detective operations across state lines. It failed, but The momentum built. Alan Pinkerton tried to suppress press coverage, claiming the device was a flare. Missouri newspapers published witness testimony, saying it was a bomb. The Homestead strike was still 17 years away. But Congress had already started counting. What happened at Homestead in 1892 made the Jesse James raid look like a misunderstanding. Number 18. The River Barge Assault Platform. Not a weapon you can hold. A weapons delivery system for 300 men. July 6, 1892. Carnegie Steel's Homestead Facility, Pennsylvania. 300 Pinkerton agents were secretly loaded onto two covered barges, the Iron Mountain and the Tide, and towed up the Monongahela River before dawn. Workers discovered the plan. They lined the riverbank. 16 people were killed and 23 wounded in the all-day fight that followed. Carnegie Steel's workers eventually surrendered to the Pennsylvania National Guard, not to Pinkerton. The river barge tactic has never been used again on American soil by any private security force. What the 300 agents were carrying explains why Congress acted the following year. The Winchester rifle, deployed at scale. You know the Winchester. Lever action, 15 rounds, the gun that won the West. The Homestead operation was the first time a private detective agency deployed military-grade repeating rifles against American citizens in an organized assault. 300 men, 15 rounds each, 4,500 potential shots before any reloading. Ohio had already banned Pinkerton-style organizations from operating within its borders. The Homestead operation gave 14 other states the evidence to make the same argument to Congress. The Anti-Pinkerton Act was passed the following year. The Winchester deployment is cited in the Congressional Record as the primary exhibit. Number 20 isn't a weapon you could carry at all. But Alan Pinkerton himself used it, and it almost got him killed. Number 20. The Confederate infiltration identity. In 1861, Alan Pinkerton operated under the alias Major E.J. Allen. A Confederate officer, he infiltrated sympathizer networks, moved through Southern territory, gathered intelligence for Union General McClellan. He was discovered in Memphis. He escaped barely. What gets buried is how systematic his infiltration methods were. He set up spy rings behind Confederate lines. He had agents interview escaped slaves for intelligence on Confederate movements, the first systematic use of that information source in the war. When Pinkerton died in July 1884, he took most of his undercover doctrine with him. What survived was in the hands of men he'd trained who had no reason to write it down. Nobody outside the agency ever saw the complete version of what came next. Even today, only fragments have surfaced. Number 21. The Rogues Gallery, mugshots, case histories, distinguishing marks and scars, newspaper clippings, rap sheets. A cross-referenced criminal database that predated the FBI by more than 50 years. And here's the part that gets buried. The Rogues' Gallery was a private intelligence database with no judicial oversight, no due process, no right of appeal. Pinkerton built it, owned it, and sold access to it. If your name was in it, accurate or not, it followed you everywhere the agency operated. When the FBI was established in 1908, it replicated the model with federal authority and public funding. In 2000, Pinkerton donated the surviving files to the Library of Congress. The papers had disintegrated nearly to powder. Most of the original database is gone. What the Rogues' Gallery couldn't hold was the full set of rules Pinkerton used to train operatives. Those lived in a single document. Number 22. The Pinkerton Operative Manual. 3 categories. The rail agent. Memorize all data on trains. No written notes. No reading during surveillance. The Special Operative. No badges. No firearms unless specifically authorized. The Shadow Operative. Described as born, not made, required impeccable judgment, quick in action, able to extricate themselves from all difficulties without betraying their presence. There's a reason this stopped being taught publicly after 1884. The manual's methods: false representation, impersonation, warrantless surveillance, would be federal crimes today under the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, the Identity Fraud Statute, and multiple state impersonation laws. The manual has never been fully released. Fragments appeared on Pinkerton's corporate website in 2019. The full document remains internal. And now we get to the 3 that explain why none of what came before lasted. Number 23 is the one that should have survived, and didn't. Number 23. The Female Detective Bureau. Most people know Kate Warren as a footnote. America's first female detective. Hired in 1856, died young. The version you've heard is the cover story. Warren didn't just work cases. In 1860, she was placed in charge of the Female Detective Bureau, overseeing all female agents, establishing a New Orleans branch, training women to use social situations as weapons. When Lincoln needed to pass safely through Baltimore in 1861, it was Warren who stayed with him in the sleeping car, posing as his invalid sister throughout the overnight passage. While the men kept watch at both ends of the train. She died January 28, 1868, 34 years old, pneumonia. Alan Pinkerton was reportedly at her bedside. He buried her in his own family plot at Graceland Cemetery, Chicago. Closing beat, outro beat. The Female Detective Bureau was quietly disbanded after her death. The FBI hired its first female agents in 1972, over 100 years later. None of Warren's specific tradecraft methods appear in any surviving training document. Number 24 explains why Congress got nervous enough to count. Number 24, the 30,000-man private army. At its peak, the 1870s through the early 1890s, Pinkerton had 2,000 active detectives and 30,000 reserves available for deployment. The entire standing United States Army at the same period numbered fewer than 28,000 men. Ohio specifically outlawed the agency entirely. 14 states petitioned Congress for limits. A private organization had built a force larger than the national military, with no democratic oversight, no congressional approval, no constitutional accountability. Deployable against American citizens by whoever could afford the contract. After July 1892, Congress had 4,500 Winchester rounds fired by private employees against American workers as Exhibit A. The act that followed was not a surprise. It was overdue by a decade. Number 25 is the part almost nobody knows. Because the law that was supposed to stop Pinkerton didn't stop Pinkerton. Number 25. The Anti-Pinkerton Act of 1893. Congress passed it in the year after Homestead. Codified today at 5 U.S.C. Section 3108. The federal government and the District of Columbia are permanently prohibited from hiring the Pinkerton Detective Agency or similar organizations. You're going to want to hear this part. The law was written to apply only to federal government contracts. Private employers, Carnegie Steel, the Pennsylvania Railroad, the coal companies, the textile mills, were explicitly left outside the law's scope. Congress drew the line at taxpayer money, not corporate money. The workers who had bled on the Monongahela riverbank could still be faced with Pinkerton agents the following year, as long as a private corporation was paying the bill. The weapon that appeared to stop Pinkerton was designed to protect Pinkerton's core business. The agency still exists. Pinkerton Consulting and Investigations is a subsidiary of Swedish security giant Securitas AB. The physical weapons are gone. The function remains. Look at what we just covered. 25 weapons. Some iron and lead. Some of them ink on paper. Some of them worn on a human face. They didn't disappear for the same reason at the same time, but there's a pattern. The physical weapons, the slungshot, the sap, the brass knuckles, the sword cane, were progressively outlawed between 1880 and 1975 in what legal scholars call the concealed weapons suppression wave. The labor unrest of the 1880s and 1890s drove that legislation. The Homestead strike gave anti-labor politicians a problem and gave labor-aligned politicians ammunition. The political compromise was concealed weapons bans that appeared neutral but specifically targeted the equipment Pinkerton agents used to control crowds. The operational weapons, the cipher systems, the cover identities, the surveillance tradecraft, were made illegal by the cumulative weight of 20th century legislation. The Identity Fraud Act of 1982, the Electronic Communications Privacy Act of 1986, state wiretapping laws from the 1970s onward. What Pinkerton's shadow operatives did as standard procedure in 1870 would require a federal warrant in 2026. The organizational weapons, the 30,000-man army, the Rogues Gallery, the cross-state deployment capability. The Anti-Pinkerton Act of 1893 addressed the surface. The FBI's founding in 1908 absorbed the intelligence function. The private army model was never legal again at that scale. Here's the number that crystallizes it. Of the 25 weapons we just covered, 23 became either illegal or non-existent within 30 years of the Homestead strike. The window was 1892 to 1924. 32 years. An entire weapons system built over 40 years, dismantled in a generation. Now here's what's worth knowing. Of the physical weapons on this list, some are still legal depending on your state. The Colt 1851 Navy is a collector's firearm through licensed dealers. The Bowie knife is legal to own in 43 states. The Derringer is legal in most states under standard firearms regulations. The slungshot is where it gets complicated. If you live in one of the 12 states that haven't specifically banned it, Alaska, Alabama, Kansas, and a handful of others, a slungshot is legal to own. The knowledge of how it was made and deployed hasn't been classified. It's the carrying of it that's regulated. The brass knuckles situation is the same. Legal to own in Texas, legal in Georgia, illegal to carry concealed in 25 states. And that's the part that matters. The Pinkerton weapons that are gone, the cipher systems, the cover identity methods, the operative manual training, those aren't gone because the knowledge itself is illegal. They're gone because the institutional system that developed and passed down the knowledge collapsed. Warren died. The Chicago fire burned the records. Corporate acquisition scattered what survived. The men who knew the methods retired and didn't write anything down. Knowing how a slungshot was made and used isn't a crime. Understanding how an operative maintained a cover identity for 6 months isn't classified. The Library of Congress has the surviving bandit files. The Smithsonian has primary accounts of the Baltimore operation. The congressional record from 1892 to 1893 describes the Homestead weapons in specific detail. The knowledge itself was never confiscated. It was simply allowed to rot. Alan Pinkerton died on July 1, 1884, at 63 years old, mid-sentence on his criminal database project. The system he was building became the basis for what the FBI eventually constructed with federal authority and public funding. Kate Warren is buried in the Pinkerton family plot at Graceland Cemetery in Chicago. She has a headstone. She has one Smithsonian feature and a lot of footnotes. Dashiell Hammett, the man who wrote The Maltese Falcon, invented the American hard-boiled detective, was a Pinkerton operative before he became a writer. What he put in his novels came from what he saw in the field. The weapons disappeared. The agency mutated. The knowledge is scattered. If you found this video worth 28 minutes, and if the kind of history that doesn't appear in school curricula is the kind that matters, you already know what to do. This channel is going to keep covering the tools, the techniques, and the people that American history quietly closed the file on. Next video, the 30 weapons Depression-era families kept hidden from government relief inspectors. The reasons they hid them are not what you'd expect. We never sleep.